something about climate change. I suggest we draw this discussion to a close. According to my agenda, we still have a report to be delivered by a member, I think, of the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. And it is this ministry in particular which represents the Russian Federation internationally on lots of issues we are discussing here. And I understand that Andrei Chaika is already online. So, sir, the floor is yours. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm happy to welcome all the participants, all the speakers and delegates alike. I'm grateful for the invitation and I'm happy to participate because we realize that any decent climate policy should be grounded in science, and scenario modeling therefore plays an important role.
Основ для дальнейшего, для дальнейшей реализации климатической политики. Стоит сказать, что в Российской Федерации климатическая
политика... I should mention here that climate policy for the Russian Federation is not a new-fangled term. The climate doctrine of the Russian Federation was approved, signed into force into 2009, and obviously Russia signed both the Kyoto Protocol and the UN Convention. And also Russia is an active participant of the Paris Agreement adopted by the conference parties in 2015. Which means that, we've got some experience in terms of implementing our climate policies.
Как вы, наверное, знаете, за прошлый год нам удалось сформировать так называемый климатический пакет актов.
You probably remember, at least Russians should remember, that last year we adopted a batch of 5 climate-related documents. So I should probably give you a brief overview. Well, first, we adopted the National Climate Adaptation Plan. It's no secret that climate change is continuing, and countries that are blessed, or at least endowed with large territories, particularly in the Arctic, are now facing degradation of permafrost and lots of other climate-related challenges. So these are the risks that we are seeing materializing in our territory already. So countries like Russia are forced to react. So the global adaptation target is very, very topical for the Russian Federation. Now, as part of the National Adaptation Plan, we are developing, the methodologies and the regulatory framework. In 2021 alone, we are planning to approve 10 sectoral adaptation plans. Next year, we'll start focusing on regional adaptation plans. Russia is composed of 85 regions, so hopefully in 2022, we shall have 85 regional adaptation plans. Therefore, our ministry has already developed a draft for implementation. It's already gone through a series of public consultations, and we hope that the document will be adopted soon so that it starts informing new policies. November last year saw the adoption of a presidential decree on a reduction of Russian emissions by 2030.
В отличие от ряда наших партнеров, в том числе и сторон Киотского протокола и Парижского соглашения.
There are some parties to both the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, that have committed to a reduction of their emissions, but have made very little progress in this respect. So far, Russia's track record has been pretty good.
Не совсем то, что ожидалось в рамках Киотского протокола. Мы взяли на себя добровольные обязательства, не в рамках Киотского протокола, а добровольные
In fact,
обязательства.
it's outside the framework of the Kyoto Protocol that Russia voluntarily committed to reduce its emissions by 30% by 2020.
Соответственно, та цель, которую
I
установлена.
understand that numbers are still coming in, but we have a pretty high degree of confidence that we have delivered on this target.
Позволит нам, а мы рассчитываем обеспечить ограничение уровня наших выбросов уровнем 70%.
So we believe we shall be able to stay at the 70% threshold.
Коллеги озвучили, это и 3% экономический рост, это и ускоренные темпы.
Well, you've already heard from the other speakers that at the same time, we want to deliver 3% GDP growth rate, and we also want to provide Russian industries with new technologies. So we're also targeting, a pretty good combination of the reduction of emissions and economic development. We actually do not think it's possible to drastically reduce emissions below 70%. To us, economic development does come first. Now, with the presidential decree, we have developed the adaptation plan, and like I said, it was approved in November 2020. It spelled out the new target for GG emissions reduction.
На климатической конференции в Катовице. Наконец, два документа находятся.
And Russia is also aligned with the agreements in Katowice. 2 documents out of 5 are still underway, so to speak. They are pretty challenging, but then they will open a new page in our history. Now, I'm talking about carbon regulation and climate policy documents. One document is designed to limit GHG emissions, and in February this year, Russian government approved a draft legislation on carbon regulation, in fact, and it is being considered now by the Russian parliament. We hope that by late July, this bill will go through the parliament. So by the second half of the year, we shall have a new regulation in place. Now, the second document is also related to Paris agreements, and in particular, long-term low-carbon development. First version of the strategy was developed last year, and I remember there were lots of heated debates of this strategy last year. What we have by now is a pretty aligned version of the strategy that has most of the stakeholders satisfied. But we're still working on identifying additional levers we can use in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we hope that by the end of the year, we shall also have a strategy that will spell out the vision of the Russian Federation for low carbon economic development. Conscious of a lack of time, I should probably tell you a bit more about the draft law we're also working on. Now, there will be new national level reports which will provide regulators with specific information on emissions and will enable the regulators to assess the performance of specific measures and activities they conduct. We hope that climate-related projects will be very much informed by international experience. Here I'm in particular referring to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, reconfirmed in Glasgow this year. I hope that this process will also be successful, and we're also hoping that Russia's interest will be observed. Also, we are preparing for the launch of the new market for carbon units. By the way, we understand carbon units is, carbon units are effectively sink units, if you like, or savings in terms of carbon emissions resulting from specific projects. In terms of regulation, we have prepared for the launch of such a market, but we believe we first need to create, the right institutions for this, and we need to finalize the regulatory framework, and there should be some information support as well. We conducted an experiment in Sakhalin last year with the thinking that we wanted to have one region that would have stricter regulation. To see how we can further reduce emissions and increase absorption.
Реализацию проекта федерального закона нам, безусловно, потребуется необходимое научное сопровождение, и, безусловно, мы возлагаем огромную надежду.
In conclusion, I'd like to say that we are really waiting for new scenarios and new sectoral, maybe models or maybe methodologies, because we understand that all this kind of work is very much informed by scientific achievement, and we would love to have access to reliable models. I see Ludmila Sorokin is raising her hand. Ma'am. Good afternoon, colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, we can, ma'am. Well, my question should go to Mr. Klepich or Mr. Chaika. Can you please elaborate on how you think such a voluntary system for trading carbon units can actually be structured? Because previously, we had sellers and buyers, and the assumption was that, buyers, would realize they were buyers. They were in the market as buyers, so to speak, when they felt they actually had to, say, increase their production. However, you did say it was a voluntary system. So where do you think buyers are going to come from? Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. This draft law does not impose any responsibilities or obligations on the market players. It doesn't have imperative power, so to speak. However, it does provide for carbon units as part of climate projects. What it effectively says is that any person should be able to conduct a project and thus generate carbon units. Who is going to buy them if nobody is required to buy carbon units? Our thinking is as follows, that, after all, lots of companies voluntarily align their strategies with SDGs.
targets, по-моему. Короче говоря, инициативная группа, которая на научной основе подтверждает.
There is this group that deals with science-based targets, and they can provide external verification and validation of what a particular company is doing.
Они смогут покупать углеродные единицы,
So
выпущенные.
companies that have voluntarily chosen to do that should be able to buy carbon units in Russia.
Определяется прежде всего тем, что есть компании, которые заинтересованы в снижении в целом углеродного следа, то есть они настолько продвинулись в своих
Also, there are corporations that have already made great strides in terms of accounting for their GG emissions and reduction thereof. It is their intrinsic motivation to do that. Obviously, they are pursuing this kind of reduction of GEG emissions not in the first scope or in the second scope, but only in third scope by purchases of such units. But even this is something. So we are simply trying to create mechanisms that all these players would be able to use. I hope I've been able to